They did not send warships. They did not send an ultimatum, a fleet, or even a formal notice. What the Meridian Compact sent to end its problem with humanity was an invoice, routed through a third-party asset broker, itemizing 41 pieces of decommissioned interdiction hardware for sale at auction. Nobody in the Ministry of Asset Recovery expected a human buyer. Nobody expected a human buyer to purchase every single lot. The equipment being sold was the blockade. For 6 years, the Compact had ringed the Sol system with a quarantine architecture built for exactly one purpose: to make certain humanity never left its own solar system with anything more advanced than chemical propulsion. Listening buoys, suppression field emitters, a picket line of patrol cutters whose sole function was intimidation, because actual combat with a species this primitive had never been considered necessary. It was not a war. It was a fence, built by people who had never once imagined the livestock might buy the fence at scrap price and take it home. The listing was Lot 4471C, filed under Ministry of Asset Recovery auction record MAR 88291, and it took Dr. Elena Voss 4 minutes to read the full manifest, because the Compact's procurement language was not designed to be read quickly. It was designed to be read by people who already knew what they were buying and simply needed the paperwork to catch up. Interdiction Class Field Emitters, Sol Perimeter Program, decommissioned per Ministry Directive 7. Units non-functional for original operational purpose. Suitable for materials reclamation, display, or educational use only. No treaty obligations attached to this transfer. No warranty of function, fitness, or safety is offered or implied. Buyer assumes all risk. Voss had spent 19 years reading compact procurement records for a living, first for a university consortium, and then when the consortium ran out of funding and interest, for herself, alone, in an office that had once been a supply closet. She had built a reputation in the small and mostly ignored field of xenotech economics for two things: being right about compact asset behavior years before anyone confirmed it, and being told politely and at length that it did not matter. She read the listing twice. Then she read the phrase non-functional for original operational purpose a third time, slowly, the way you read a sentence you suspect is lying to you. Non-functional for its original purpose was not the same claim as non-functional. It was a narrower claim. It was the kind of narrower claim a very good lawyer writes when a very tired ministry needs to move 41 units of hardware off its books before the fiscal quarter closes, and does not particularly care what happens to them after that. She placed the bid herself, under a shell procurement entity she had incorporated 11 years earlier and never used, because she had always suspected that someday the compact would need money faster than it needed caution. She was right. The compact needed money faster than it needed caution. The ministry's condescension had a face, and the face belonged to Undersecretary Threll Vashencourt, who conducted the closing call from an office with a window that showed, deliberately, a view of 3 separate compact home systems arranged for maximum effect. Vashencourt spoke English without accent or hesitation, the fluency of someone who had learned it the way you learn a skill you expect to use exactly once, competently, and never again. "You understand," Vashencourt said, smiling in the particular way that people smile when they are being generous to someone who cannot appreciate it, "that this hardware represents to us a bookkeeping entry. To you, I imagine it will be something closer to a monument. Humanity has waited a long time to own something with our name on it. I am pleased we could arrange that, even in this small way." He did not ask what she intended to do with 41 pieces of decommissioned blockade infrastructure. It did not occur to him that the answer mattered, because in his professional experience, species at humanity's tier acquired advanced hardware the way children acquired museum souvenirs. As objects to be admired, not systems to be understood. Voss said thank you and nothing else, because she had learned long before this call that the most dangerous thing you could do to a man like Vashencourt was give him a reason to keep listening. She sat in silence for perhaps 90 seconds after the connection closed. Then she picked up her phone and made the second call of the day, the one that mattered more than the first. "I want to board it," she said, when Director Osa answered. "All 41 units, before anyone in procurement reads the manifest closely enough to change their mind. I'm not interested in what the compact thinks they stripped out. I'm interested in everything else." The 41 units arrived over the following 6 weeks, delivered by 3 separate haulage contractors who had no idea what they were carrying and did not ask, because compact shipping manifests were written to discourage exactly that kind of curiosity. They were stored in a decommissioned naval drydock outside Bremerton, that the Sol Defense Coordination Office had quietly repurposed the moment Voss's procurement flag crossed a desk that mattered. The boarding party assembled around the hardware was small, 4 people plus Voss, plus a rotating shift of technicians who did not ask questions because they had learned, over the preceding decade of first contact, that the questions were usually answered eventually and always answered better if you were patient. Dr. Amara Osai, field engineer, had spent 11 years arguing that Compact's suppression field technology could not possibly work the way the Compact's own public documentation claimed, because the documentation described a mechanism that violated 3 separate conservation principles as she understood them. She had been correct. The public documentation was wrong on purpose, a deliberate obfuscation layer built into every export-grade technical manual the Compact released, and she had spent a decade being told her objection was a rounding error in someone else's homework. Cade Lindqvist, cryptanalyst formerly of a defense contractor that had let him go for spending 18 months on a side project his supervisors considered a waste of clearance, had built, without authorization or funding, a partial decryption framework for compact targeting architecture based entirely on intercepted patrol chatter. He had been laughed out of 2 conferences. He brought the framework with him in a bag that had not left his side in 4 years. Dr. Priya Raman, systems architect, no relation to any other Raman working in the field, just the most common surname in a country of 1.5 billion people, and an unhelpful coincidence that had followed her through 3 job interviews. Specialized in distributed sensor networks, and had spent her career arguing that a blockade built entirely of listening buoys had to have a coordination layer nobody had ever detected. Because a blockade without coordination is just noise. Each of them had been mocked, in some specific and professionally documented way, for being right before anyone else was willing to admit it. Osai found the first emitter's access panel already loose, not from damage but from age, the housing seals brittle in a way that suggested the unit had sat in a reclamation queue for years before the auction listing went up. She removed the panel and stood very still for 11 seconds because the lattice beneath it was not scrap. "This isn't decommissioned," she said quietly to no one in particular. "It's asleep." The discovery loop that followed ran across 5 weeks and 4 sections of the recovered hardware, and every scene inside it followed the same shape. Someone reached a specific place inside a specific piece of alien equipment, and their body told the room what had happened before their mouth did. The emitter bay, Osai sat down on the floor of the dry dock because her legs stopped working correctly. The suppression field lattice was not inert material dressed up as a weapon housing. It was actively organized, a semi-crystalline structure held in a deliberate lattice orientation that required continuous low-power maintenance current to preserve. Current that the decommissioned units had, impossibly, still been receiving, routed through a passive trickle charge layer the ministry's disposal inventory had never flagged, because nobody in asset recovery had thought to check whether scrap needed to be kept alive. "They didn't decommission the field generators," Osai said once she could speak again. "They put them into standby and forgot the standby layer existed. This isn't a museum piece. This is a weapon someone left the safety off." The next scene ended with a line that made the following one feel larger before it had even started. Osai, still on the floor looking at Lindqvist. "If the field generators are alive, check the targeting cores next." Whoever filed this disposal order didn't check anything. The targeting core. Lindqvist did not sit down. He went completely still instead, one hand resting on the open access port for nearly a full minute, while the framework he had spent 4 years building against nothing but stolen patrol chatter suddenly had something real to bite into. The targeting core was not scrubbed. It was formatted at the administrative layer only, the layer visible to a routine disposal audit, while the deep targeting logic beneath it remained fully intact. Encrypted with the same key architecture Lindqvist had already partially broken from years of intercepted transmissions. Because the Compact reused cryptographic infrastructure across an entire hardware generation instead of retiring it, the way a species with no real adversaries has never needed to. "They didn't decommission this," Lindqvist said. "They wiped the label off the box and left the box exactly where it was. I have 3 weeks of intercepted patrol traffic that uses this exact key rotation. Give me the core and give me 2 months and I don't just have a targeting brain. I have the current one." The coordination layer. Raman's discovery took the longest to reach and mattered the most, because it was not a single piece of hardware but a pattern spread across 19 separate listening buoys, each individually meaningless, together in architecture. She stopped walking through the dry dock catalog entirely and stood in front of a wall of buoy schematics for 4 minutes before she spoke. "These aren't a blockade," she said. "They're a network. Each buoy is a node. The network has a coordination protocol, and the coordination protocol is the same one Cade's targeting cores are running. The Compact didn't sell us 41 pieces of scrap. They sold us the operating system for the fence around our own solar system. The materials. The last discovery belonged to no single specialist and to all of them together, a molecular analysis of the emitter housing that OSI ran almost as an afterthought 3 weeks in, expecting confirmation of what they already knew. Instead, she found a manufacturing signature that matched, exactly, the hull plating on the active patrol cutters still stationed at the edge of the Sol system. Same alloy, same fabrication tolerances, same production run 6 years apart. OSI did not sit down this time. She simply looked at the readout for a long moment and said quietly, "This isn't old hardware. This is current hardware with an old label on it." Voss did not sleep for most of the 3rd week, not because the discoveries frightened her, but because the arithmetic of what they meant kept refusing to resolve into something she could safely put down. She had spent 19 years being right about the compact in a room where being right changed nothing. Now she was right in a room that could not stop listening, and the weight of that was its own kind of exhaustion, the specific tiredness of a person whose caution has finally become load-bearing. She told no one that because there was no one whose job it was to hear it, and because the work in front of her did not pause to accommodate the feeling. By the 5th week, the Sol Defense Coordination Office had a working replication timeline for the suppression field lattice, a partially cracked targeting architecture that matched active compact hardware, and a coordination protocol map for the entire perimeter blockade, built in total. From 41 units, the Ministry of Asset Recovery had sold for the price of scrap metal, because nobody in that office had imagined a buyer capable of reading the fine print. That was when the compact noticed. The message arrived through the same formal diplomatic channel that had 6 years earlier delivered the original blockade notification, and it was written in the same voice. Patient, precise, and constructed by people who had been perfecting institutional condescension for roughly 3,000 years. It has come to the attention of the Compliance Directorate that Materiel disposed of under Ministry Directive 7, Lot 4471C, retained active operational subsystems inconsistent with its classification as reclamation-grade scrap. This constitutes an administrative error, not a transfer of capability, and no rights of ownership, use, or replication attached to the buyer as a result. You are directed to surrender all 41 units, along with any derivative technical materials produced from their examination, within 72 hours. Failure to comply will be treated as unauthorized retention of compact strategic assets and will be addressed accordingly. There was no threat of invasion in the message, because there did not need to be one. Everyone in the room reading it understood exactly what addressed accordingly meant from a species that had built a 6-year blockade out of listening buoys and patience. Voss read it twice, the same way she had read the original auction listing, and then set the message down. "They want it back in 72 hours, she said. "Cade, how long do you actually need?" "For a working targeting solution against their current fleet configuration, 60 hours if I don't sleep." Lindqvist did not look up from his terminal. "I've had 4 years to get ready for this. I just didn't know I was getting ready for this." The corrective fleet arrived 9 minutes after the 72-hour deadline expired, 4 patrol cutters of the same class the recovered emitters had come from, moving in a formation built for intimidation rather than combat, because until that moment, no human adversary had ever required anything else. The cutters opened the encounter with a targeting sweep. It was answered immediately, and precisely, by a suppression field tuned to the exact frequency the sweep was broadcasting on, because OSI's replicated emitters were not approximations. They were the same hardware awake, running the same maintenance layer firmware the compact had never bothered to update because nothing had ever needed updating it before. The sweep failed. The cutter's sensor grid, built to coordinate through the same protocol layer Raman had mapped from 19 scrapped buoys, lost synchronization across all 4 ships simultaneously, because the field did not blind them. It spoke their own coordination language back at them, faster than they could filter it. 2 cutters broke formation immediately, firing blind along their last known targeting solution. The rounds missed by a margin that would have been embarrassing in a training exercise. 1 cutter adapted within 40 seconds, dropping to a manual targeting override that bypassed the compromised network layer entirely and scored a glancing hit on the outer hull of the drydock's forward shield. It was the only competent shot fired in the entire engagement, and it earned a half-second of total silence in the coordination room before Lindqvist's decrypted targeting core routed a firing solution around the manual override too, because the core had been built 6 years earlier to anticipate exactly that failsafe. The 4th cutter never engaged. 9 minutes and 40 seconds after the first shot was fired, it reversed thrust and began withdrawal, transmitting nothing. Voss ordered no pursuit. Whoever was on that ship had understood something the other 3 had not, fast enough to act on it, and letting them carry that understanding home mattered more than one more kill. The engagement lasted 11 minutes and 6 seconds. 3 cutters disabled, none destroyed. 1 withdrawn untouched. The room did not cheer. Nobody in it had the energy left for that, and the prose of the moment did not call for it either. Short sentences, no exclamation, the mode of the room shifting the instant the last targeting lock dropped. The personal transmission arrived 11 hours later, on a channel that had never been used for anything but formal diplomatic traffic, and it opened with 8 full seconds of silence before Vashenkour spoke, which was itself information, because a man that fluent in institutional language did not run out of words by accident. "I want to be precise about what I am saying," he said finally, "because I have spent 3 days deciding how to say it. I assumed that hardware taken out of active service and relabeled for disposal would be, to a species at your stage, functionally inert. I was wrong about that. I was wrong specifically. I did not think you were incapable. I simply never imagined you would read the manifest closely enough to notice what we had failed to strip. That was audacious, and it was not something my office accounted for, and I do not say that easily." He paused again briefly. "The Directorate will not be pursuing further corrective action. I expect we will be speaking again, under different terms than the ones I assumed 6 years ago." The transmission ended there. It was not an apology in the shape either species usually offered one, but it was closer to honest than anything the compact had sent humanity since the blockade began. And Voss understood, listening to it a second time, that this was the version of respect a man like Vashenkour was capable of giving. By the time the formal ceasefire correspondence began arriving through proper channels, Voss was already 3 pages into a different document entirely, drafted the night before the battle and revised twice since, because she had learned, 19 years into a career nobody had taken seriously, that leverage used once is a victory and leverage used twice is a strategy. "We reverse-engineered 40% of a suppression field lattice from 4 sealed units and no documentation," she said, in the negotiation room, to a compact trade delegate who had clearly been briefed to expect gratitude and was visibly recalibrating in real time. "That took us 5 weeks. With full manufacturing schematics and the metallurgy specs your own people already have on file, we'd have functional field parity within 6 months instead of 18. I'm not asking for a gift. I'm proposing a trade catalog, priced the way the compact prices everything else it sells at auction." She did not raise her voice. She did not need to. The delegate across from her had read the same battle report everyone else in the compact had read by then, and knew exactly what 40%, reached in 5 weeks by 4 people working from scrap, implied about the other 60. Voss did not stay in the room to watch him decide. She had already gone back to the manifest for Lot 4471C, reading it a 4th time, not because anything in it had changed, but because she was already looking past it, toward the next listing the Ministry of Asset Recovery would eventually be careless enough to post. She had been thinking about the next 18 months since the second week.